So what I'm about to say, please hold it lightly. Don't make a mental map out of it or perceive it as doctrine or some kind of gospel. It's just a simple pointing. If you can feel into it instinctually, it might provide some sort of experiential insight. Experiential is the key word there, because this is the kind of insight you can't think about. Thoughts will arise, but they're not actually about the insight itself. The insight is completely beyond thoughts. The insight I'm pointing to is beyond concepts. You'll never get your mind around it. It has too much latitude, too many degrees of freedom. It's too subtle. It's even too obvious for thought to grab hold of it. So here's the pointing. There are, roughly speaking, two different ways of experiencing reality. When I say reality, I don't mean something conceptual. I don't mean something theoretical. I don't mean something you've learned about reality. I mean this moment right now. What you're experiencing right now. Or what is being experienced right now. One is that you're sitting there in a body, looking out at a world of objects. Objects means things at a distance. Those objects are people. Those objects are cars and trees and the sky and the ground and your limbs. Those are all objects in some seemingly external world. But you're in there somewhere, right? Inside the body. Inside the mind, perhaps, or the head. What is your location there? Where do you feel like you reside? Where have you been residing as long as you can remember? Oh, also, in this world of objects, you being the subject to those objects, there's a past that you can constantly use to remind yourself that this is the way it is. That there's external objects, people, and events, and that timeline goes back as far as you care to remember. And you can reference memories about what you did, who you are, who you were, where you're going, choices you made, interactions you've had with other people, and the effects they've had on you. You can access all of this in memory, in thought. You know that it's not actually happening right here as you think about it, but the thoughts are there, which prove that you really do exist on this timeline, in this world of subject and object. It seems pretty obvious, doesn't it? You're a choice maker. You inhabit a body that can act on the environment, so you can stand up and walk away from this video. Or sitting here right now, you can think about what you're going to do when the video finishes. What are you going to do later today? What are your plans? What things do you have to take care of? What are the responsibilities? So you can kind of construct a future timeline as well, similar to the past timeline in that it's mental, it's all in the mind, but you're sure it's true. There's definitely a future, and in that future, the world will look the same as it does now. There'll be a subject, which is you, and there'll be objects out there that you're acting upon and interacting with. And in this world of subject-object, or being a you inhabiting the body, the mind, inside that head somewhere, looking out at a world of objects, rooms, outdoor environments, seeing other people and other things. There are hidden rules that sometimes you're aware of and other times you're not. And sometimes you're able to detect those rules. Other times they're obscured. Examples of these rules are, you're always trying to make yourself feel better. You always have to find a way to solve the problem of being who you are. And your problems are specific to you. Other people have similar problems, but no one quite understands the problems you have. So you hide them. And there's shame around that. There's a sense that somewhere at the core, there's something about me I don't want to look at. That needs to remain hidden. Other rules of this world of subject and object have to do with social expectation, validation, etc. Meaning it's important to fit in. I have to know where I stand in my group of peers or among those that I come in contact with, especially those that I'm closest to, those that I have emotional bonds with. This is very important to my survival, to my health. Even underlying that set of rules, there's a set of rules that is so taken for granted, that's so assumed in the way we function moment to moment, the way we think, perceive, and experience even the sense world, or at least what we consider to be the sense world. And those are that separation exists in this world, that the world doesn't make any sense without separation. I have to stand apart from the world to act upon it, to manipulate objects in it, to manipulate experiences, to get what I want, to make myself feel better and avoid pain. So this assumption of separation is very, very foundational to all of my thoughts. I can't really have a thought about the past without imagining time and space, without imagining me over here and objects over there, imagining separation. In fact, imagination is sort of built out of separation. There needs to be an apparent perceiver and that which is perceived to imagine anything. So that's another foundational belief, that there is separation, that things are distinct, that form exists and it separates reality into parts. Again, this is such a fundamental assumption that even to question it just becomes very theoretical very quickly. Another assumption is that I'm an agent, or I have agency. This means that I move from experience to experience, and I can choose one experience over another experience, decide which one's better for me, and then pick one and discard the other. This is associated with the sense of standing apart, or the sense of separation in subject-object, but it has a slightly different flavor. Again, this is so deeply rooted in our processing that it's pretty uncommon to even see this belief directly, or this rule. So that entire description is one way of experiencing reality. I would say most people experience that way of experiencing reality most of the time. So here's another way, just another possibility. See if you can feel into it. So to elucidate this alternative way of experiencing, instead of going from the top down like we did with the first description, we're going to start from the bottom up. We're going to start by pointing out that there indeed is no such thing as separation. There isn't space in which different objects exist and act upon one another. So if there's no separation, what is there? There's intimacy. You're already everything. Or alternatively, everything is already everything. Nothing has ever been apart from anything else. And thus, there aren't things. There aren't separate objects. And yet, there's still experience. But there's nothing apart from that experience to know it as experience. So really, no description is necessary. There's no desire to stand apart and describe this experience to anyone or even to myself, because anyone and myself don't exist. There's nothing apart. There aren't separate entities or objects. There's just this obvious intimacy. But this isn't the kind of intimacy where multiple objects or entities are intimate with one another. This is the kind of intimacy that is so fundamental to experiencing that it's laughable that anything could ever exist on its own. It's just not possible. So because there's nothing standing apart, there's nothing that's moving from moment to moment. Indeed, there aren't even moments, because there's no need to think about time. There's no need to think about a past and a future, because there's nothing that's apart that's looking at a timeline or a series of events and moving from one to the other. So instead of there being a timeline, what is there? There's eternity. Eternity means an instinctual knowing that time does not exist. Eternity doesn't mean a long time. Eternity means there's no timeline. The paradigm of time is seen to be completely psychological. So you could call this presence, but even presence really lacks meaning here, because there's not anything that's not presence. So again, you're back to this place where there's no need to describe. In fact, descriptions can really only obscure, but even that's not true because there's no obscuration here, there's only clarity. The mind obscures. The illusions of time and space obscure. The illusion of agency obscures. So, even the need to describe goes out the window. The need to choose goes out the window. And because the apparatus that sits up on top of our shoulders that describes things all day long is rendered sort of inert, meaning there's no need for it to describe this, distinctions fall away as well. And this is critical. There's no distinction. Distinctions are seen to be false. And when distinctions are seen to be false, then the natural reflexive activity of the mind calms down. And what I mean by that is the reflexive activity of the mind, when it hears that there's no agent, will say then, how can I do anything? Won't I just sit there and rot? How can I get up and decide to eat or go to work? But those are thoughts. Those are the reflexive activity of the mind because the mind operates out of distinction. But reality does not operate out of distinction. Reality actually makes no distinction between movement and stillness. Reality makes no distinction between activity and rest. So, in the conventional sense, the body-mind, you, can get up, walk around, perform activities, eat, drink, laugh, cry, sleep, wake up, and remain completely still. It's like magic. It's like a miracle. Is it possible that this is all that's ever been happening? Look and see.